And now we find ourselves at F104,
Woo!
the Defense Acquisition System. Again, another system that is used by all services of the military. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes.
I'm Mr. Jim Kennedy.
And we're still part of Team 29 because they haven't fired us yet.
We're working on it, though.
Yep.
These videos might help.
Well, we'll see. Your comments could certainly help. So make sure you do your mid-course and end-of-course surveys. All right. So this is the learning objectives. We understand the linkage between the JSIDs, which we talked about in 102, and the Defense Acquisition System. We understand the key principles behind it and the acquisition program baseline and why that's important. The different key events within the Defense Acquisition System. So it's 5 phases and it's 3 decision points, and also understand the ethical principles and stewardship that we all need to make sure we're using that could possibly impact the DAS. All right. So our force management model, which we're all familiar with at this point, we're down there, the red circle, the military acquisition management process. So F101, where we had those requirements, F102, when we found we had capability gaps to complete those requirements, then we came up with, hey, we need to come up with a .mil PFP solution. If we went with an O, we did the design organizations for 103 Alpha, 103 Bravo, where we determined the authorizations for those organizations. But now we're in the big M, material. So we need to have a material solution to fill that capability gap. Whichever one we went with, we always have to integrate them in to training and ready units to have units for COCOM commanders to use and abuse. So we are there in military acquisition management process, the DAS. Next slide. All right, so we talked about the linkage between the JSIDs and the DAS. Pretty simple. So you have the JSIDs capability needs analysis, their capability gap. We said, okay, we got a gap. It's been approved that it is a gap, and we send it down to TRADOC through the capabilities-based assessment for a .mil PFP solution recommendation. They could come up with, the Center of Excellence could send back an ICD, which is a material and non-material solution, but keep repeating that ICD is material, but there will be non-material implications to that material solution. So an ICD will have both material and non-material. If it is strictly non-material, there is no material solution whatsoever, it would be a DCR, .mil PF change recommendation. And that could be for any of the other .mil PFP domains, so doctrine, training, leadership, policy.
You know, just as an example, women in combat arms that's a new policy change, but that's not a material solution to that. That's new facilities, possibly new training, new leadership and education, but there's no really material that I can think of that would be involved with that.
So that's all DCR. But if there is a material piece of it, you do an ICD, initial capabilities document, and that goes in a couple of different options. You can either have a system upgrade of a current piece of equipment, you can modify a piece of equipment that currently exists, or you can start a new program altogether. Next slide, please. All right, but before you go into developing a new piece of equipment, which is the most costly and longest lasting solution, or longest taking solution, you want to look into doing those upgrades or modifications first. So if you have a current Humvee or something and you can put a new engine into it, you just extended its life, so that's upgrading or improving that existing capability. Or if you want a vehicle to go into a combat zone and have a longer life, you put some armor onto it. So now you're modifying, you're giving it a new capability. Maybe you put a new sensor on it, or you add a new something another that gives it a capability it didn't have before. So as we said,
Crow, the gunners,
turret and all those things. Yeah, so if you add something to a current piece of equipment that gives it a new capability, then that's modifying it. And then there's a couple of different programs that we have listed there in green that kind of highlight that, either extending the life of a piece of equipment or adding new capability and modifying that piece of equipment. And there are others. Those are just a few to
these are generally always cheaper than buying a new process. Plus, they're a lot faster. Students are always saying, why can't we do this stuff faster? We're doing it as fast as we can do it to make sure it's safe and integrated, things like that. But the DoD always looks to try and do these first before you go buy something new. So if you do have to buy something new, we use the Defense Acquisition System. There are 5 different models, but one's got 2 different types of 5, 6, depending on how you do math. And since I'm a colonel and from South Carolina, you don't want me doing math in public.
Or any other time.
But if we're going to do any modifications of those programs, we're only going to talk to hardware intensive program model 1 in our classes. And that's because that's the longest, the most complex process. If you can do those, the rest of them are fairly easy to figure out. You can look through those and how the Army runs does a pretty good job of explaining those. But here are the phases. There are 5 phases. And it all starts out with the initial capabilities document that Chris mentioned there. Here's what we need to have. And think big hand, little map. Okay. I need something to do this. And that's what a capability is. In this amount of time, in this amount of environment, etc. It is not, I need a truck to do it. It is, I need, say, fuel move from point A to point B in X amount of time, X amount of gallons.
So I need a platform that has the ability to move this to this location in this amount of time. But we can't say, because it may be a helicopter, it may be a transporter beam, it may be a truck. So again, initial capabilities document is not so specific that it's backing you to a corner.
Yeah. Then as you go, you have 3 different milestones, A, B, and C, and all this is laid out very well in your reading, because I think it was a pretty well-written reading, to be totally honest with you.
I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, the authors are very smart, very intelligent.
Attractive. And humble.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, you always say that about them. They're very good. But the 3 milestones where they actually sit down at a meeting with the decision authority, a very senior person, to say, yes, you're approved to go forward. Majors put a lot of work into this, in these milestone decisions, because that's really where you're committing a lot of money. You have documents up here. These are the JSIDS documents. These are developed by the acquisition community and the requirements folks. That's the major lieutenant colonel sitting down at the schoolhouse saying, let's look at the JLTV. Here's what this truck needs to be able to do. Or here's what this 9mm needs to be able to do. Or here's what this helicopter needs to be able to do. Here's whatever these things are. That's the requirements activities. Or as they said when they developed the Death Star, we need an exhaust port where the Millennium Falcon can fit through. Exactly. Okay. Just think about I was watching it when I was watching Rogue One. I was thinking about all the different big material acquisition that went into building the Death Star.
The entire defense acquisition system could be explained by the Death Star.
Exactly. I mean, it's just amazing. Okay, and then you got the 5 phases. This is, if you think of them kind of as a funnel, the material solutions analysis, that's where they kind of look at all the broad ideas, all the great ideas from industry. They just come up with, do different analysis of alternatives and figure it out. Then they decide to go forward. They develop a capabilities development document. This very broad scope. Here's kind of what it needs to be able to do. And then they validate it later on as they go through technology maturation and risk reduction. What is it we need to be able to do? How's the manufacturing going? What risk can we get down? Can we do a whole bunch of testing and prototyping in here? Then they finalize the capabilities development document. They do a release for proposal, sending it out to industry, see who wants to build this thing. They do another milestone decision, or they've got money, so okay, we're going to do this. They award the contract, they design it, and then engineer and manufacturer development to make sure they can produce it. And then once all that's done, they know the product works. We can manufacture it sufficiently. It meets all the requirements that we have from the requiring activities. Then they have a final meeting to say, okay, yes, let's go ahead and do this. Let's make about 10%. That number varies, but a very small, it's called low rate initial production, to make sure the manufacturing process works. That takes them a month to test them. And then once at some point, they'll make a full rate production decision. Say, okay, we're now committing a whole lot of money to the Army for the long term. So they go out and buy it. They start producing them. They field the first unit, and then they field the rest of the Army that's fully operation capable. Now this is not to scale. This may be 6 months, 8 months, a year. This may take, like in the JLTV, I think it's an 18-year process. So it's not to scale. I guess I'd put that on the slide next time. So this may take 18 years, but operations and support, that may take, like for the tank, we still have the M1 tank that came in service in the early 1980s. I remember that getting fielded at Fort Stewart. It was my first assignment. And we still have the M1. It's not going anywhere for a while. So operations and support is once you get it in a unit. And force integration happens at this dotted line. That's why it's dotted, because a lot of things, first units will get it, and it will stay until the last units get it. Then that's when it becomes the Army to do it. 5 phases laid out very well in your reading. 2 in-phase decisions: the release for proposal to send it out to industry to bid on the contract, and the full rate production is going to execute a lot of money and spend it right there. The Army does everything by evolutionary acquisition now. That's a deliberate process. And again, as we said with the other classes, we want you to understand there is a deliberate, analytical, functioning process for acquiring material. Is it perfect? No. But there's a lot of reasons for the way it is. But we just want you to have confidence that the system does work. So we look at building things in increments. Look at the M1 tank, or the JLTV. We know we can't afford everything we want to do to it now. So we will plan now here's the base JLTV, and 5 years later, when we have more money or more technology is developed, we'll then do an increment 2, an increment 3, an increment 4. You'll see like the Paladin A7. Right on the Paladin A7, you have different models now, the Apache and the the Blackhawk,
the Chinook,
all the aircraft have different models, but they're very old concepts.
You got the M4, the A1.
That's right. Look at just the M16. It's got M16A3, I think was the last one before it went away. So yeah, but that's how we do things. We do evolutionary, because things are always changing. We just can't buy it. We have what's called the acquisition program baseline, and it is a contract between the program manager, the PEO, and the milestone decision authority that includes the requirement activity that says here's what we can afford based on cost, schedule, and performance, and risk. So you've got cost, schedule, performance over here based on risk. So with the new 9mm, do you want that shot group to be 5 inches at 100 meters, or do you want it to be 4 inches? Okay, that's cost, schedule, performance, and risk. ACATS we'll talk about with cost. Depending on how much it costs, there's a different level of oversight. Performance, we'll talk about these in a minute. Key performance parameters and TRLs. Chris will take you through that. And schedule, we talked about these in 102, I believe. Urgent, emergent, and deliberate. When do you need it? Now, granted, you may plan on something to be deliberate, but situation changes, the enemy gets a vote, it may change to urgent. So these are the cost, performance, schedule, but risk is always a big one. What can we do
So let's take a look at.
I'll turn over to Chris.
Yep. So let's take a look at performance piece. So we just said that the APB, the acquisition baseline, consisted of performance, cost, and schedule. So let's look at performance. So KPPs, a limited number of measurable and testable attributes. These are the critical, most essential things that piece of equipment needs to be able to do that are measurable and testable. So underneath KPPs, there are a few that are required, again, congressionally directed. So force protection and survivability, congressionally directed, so that the performance characteristics for force protection and survivability must meet a certain threshold. You also have sustainment, which is the reliability of it, the cost, the ownership cost of it, what's it going to take to sustain that piece of equipment, and then it has to be net ready. So interoperability compliance means that if you buy a radio, it's got to be able to talk to all the radios. Then you also have 2 selective applied KPPs, system training, engineer efficiency. But it's really those KPPs, those measurable and testable attributes that are critical to the piece of the equipment performing its function. So that's what a KPP is. Then you have technology readiness levels. So basically, we can't let a piece of equipment go forward in the process of being built if it can't achieve its requirements through technology. So if that technology is not able to be demonstrated in a relevant environment, TRL 6, it cannot pass milestone B. So until that piece of equipment can go out to a relevant environment and demonstrate its capability, it cannot pass milestone B. Same thing for milestone C. If you can't pass TRL 7, which is demonstrated in an operational environment, then you can't pass milestone C. So TRLs are there to ensure that the technology is at an appropriate level to move forward in the development process. Same thing with the MRLs. So talking about producing something. So if it can't be produced at a certain amount of readiness level, the manufacturing level, then it also can't move past those milestones. But that's what the TRLs and the MRLs are there for, to ensure they are ready to go forward in the process, the DAS process itself.
And you may have, some people of our students, and even when I was there, you would get things from the program managers or from DA saying, hey, while you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, hey, try this system out and tell us how it works. That is system prototype demonstrated in an operational environment, getting that feedback from the soldiers. So you may, if you've done that, you've already been involved in the defense acquisition system. You just didn't know it.
All right, so that's program. Now looking at cost. So the acquisition categories, the ACATs. So these are programs that are designated by cost, and then who approves them is directed by what level category they are. So you have ACAT 1. Currently 28 programs in the ACAT 1. Example, that would be the JLTV, very expensive program there under the primary criteria you can see. So if research, development, testing, and evaluation is greater than $480 million or the procurement cost is more than $2.79 billion, it is an ACAT 1 program, and it has to be approved by the Defense Acquisition Executive, or in the case of an ACAT 1C, C being for component, the Army Acquisition Executive. So they are the ones that say, they sign off on the program saying, yes, it's good, we can continue to move forward. If you have an ACAT 1A, then you can see the different costs there on the right. And those, again, are still validated by the Defense Acquisition Executive for the 1AM, or the 1AC would be the Army Acquisition Executive, or the Air Force Acquisition Executive, or the Navy Acquisition Executive. It's just the service is what the C is there for a component. Then you have ACAT 2, 43 programs. Again, you can see the primary criteria there, RDT&E greater than 185, or procurement costs as greater than 835 million. And those will be done by their service acquisition executive. So for us, the Army Acquisition Executive. And then ACAT 3, where the majority of the programs are. You see some examples there, the Mark 19, nods, body armor, things of that nature. So anything's doesn't meet the criteria for 1 or 2 falls into a 3. The Navy actually has ACAT 4, but we're not in the Navy. We're not in the Navy, are we?
No.
No. So we will stop at ACAT 3, which is the lowest level ACAT code that the Army uses, and that's usually the authority goes down to the PEO, so the Program Executive Office.
So why is the Army Acquisition Objective doing it? Well, it goes back to Title 10 that we talked about in the very first class, train, man, and equip. Acquisition is equipping the service.
So right now, the DODI Instruction 5000.02 talks about ACATs and talks about the DAS. There are currently, I think, 308 total active Army programs that are out there.
As of November.
As of November, so that number can go up or down. And there were, as of November, 65 pre-ACAT programs, so ones that have not quite been decide which costs they had associated with them, so determine which ACAT code they go to.
And right now the plan is for the next couple of years, probably until about 19 or 20, the Army doesn't have any big acquisition programs. JLTV is a joint program. That's kind of the biggest thing going. But everything else is incremental evolutionary change. They have plans for the Apache. They have plans for the M1 tank, but they aren't buying any new big stuff. There's a lot of modernization and a lot of small things. Yes, they're looking at the AMDP. Can't remember what it stands for. The Armored.
I don't remember what it stands for either, but it's the replacement of the 113.
Yeah. But that's going to be a very small dollar figure because it's only replacing, 500 vehicles or something like that. So it may sound like a big thing because it's probably going to be tracked or whatever, but you got to hit certain dollar thresholds you have to get through these things. So, okay. So who are some of the key players? In the Army requirements approvers, if it's an urgent need, an operational need statement, you may have had some experience with some of those in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or wherever. That's the AR2B that does that quickly. ARCIC that we've talked about looks at capability gaps, and we've talked about we'll talk about the AROC in a minute. That's chaired by the Chief of Staff of the Army, who assesses, validates, and prioritizes our JSIDS documents. The ASARC, the Army Systems Acquisition Review Council, they look at all these different programs. Well, here's the G6 is providing information on C4ISR and networks. The G4 is providing information on sustainability. How are we going to sustain this new piece of equipment? And the military deputy to the ASALT is providing information on acquisition and the military aspect of it, working with AMC. These are the current program executive offices. There's one joint one. That's the Army Chemical Biological Defense Command. And then all these program, project, and product managers. Those, if you will, are your battalion commanders and your brigade commanders within the acquisition community. They're all centrally selected on a command list or central selected list, just like battalion and brigade commanders. Then we talked about the AROC, the Army Requirements Oversight Council. So who's watching the hen house? The acquisition community, the Secretary of the Army, They do all the acquisition and the buying. They are the Army's acquisition executive. They buy what the Army, the green suiters, need. What the G3 says, yep, this is a requirement, and it's going to be the priority to put funding against. But the AROC is the oversight for everybody, saying, yes, this is still a valid military need for the Army. So that's what they do. Here's the chief in this past year has bulked up the members. A lot of these folks were I think before the
chief decided
Chief Miller, he added from the Assistant Secretary of the Army FMNC down. They used to all be backseaters, and if needed, they're all now required to be here.
The chief said if I'm going to run this, and he wanted to run it, that he's going to have his commanders there. So that's why you have the commanders from AMC, FORSCOM, TRADOC, all the key players.
Yeah, it's a much bigger voice of the commander in there than it did have. They validate all the documents. Anything that's going to the Joint Staff, they validate there as well before it goes up to the Joint Staff. And then you have the JROC. They look at all the joint, what's going on, big picture, all the ACAT 1s, anything that's going on with the services to make sure there's no redundancy. It's a limited audience there, but it's all the vices sitting around, making sure there's a couple of different advisory boards that they have that staff everything first. So it's a lot of fun, but it's a very good thing to have to make sure you've got that oversight and make sure things aren't getting stovepiped. Now, what do we do at the end of the life cycle model when we get rid of it? As we're buying it, we're planning on getting rid of it. Well, we have the Army divestiture process. It's managed by the Army G4. When things come up as excess, we look for different ways to get rid of them. And then we finally either divest it. Some stuff needs money. You have to demilitarize it. Some stuff we're going to retain for future uses, or some stuff we're going to divest in no prep. I mean, you just take it out and get it to DRMO or DLA Defense Disposal Services and chop it up. Okay. And then here's the summary. We've talked about how we link the PPB and the JSIDs with this when we start buying things. PPB tells us how many we can buy, what we need to buy. So it's kind of a constant loop. PPB, the programming phase, tells us how many we can buy. The acquisition system tells us how much it's going to cost, which feeds into how many we can buy, which feeds into the cost. JSIS tells us what we need to buy. The acquisition program baseline is that balance between cost, schedule, and performance. You'll do a PE in class on the DAS and the 5 phases, the milestones. The milestone decision authorities are determined by ACAT. You talked about the KPPs with Chris and the AROC. They're very important now in validating and improving the Army requirements, and it's much more consolidated than it was in previous years, mostly due to financial constraints and just so many different priorities. And as you're going through it all, you got to make sure you, again, apply your ethical stewardship, your technical knowledge, and you have to be a professional and make sure that you're doing the right thing for the Army when you're going through the DAS.
Yep. So at this point, we've now developed new organizations, and we've palmed for them, and we've requested to build new pieces of equipment and palm for them. So now we got to find out how to integrate them. That's what the next class is about, F105, Force Integration.
That's right.
So hold on to your hats. That's going to be a heck of a ride.